Hey gents, do you know what Hamilton, Omega, and Breguet all have in common? Well, they're all owned by the same huge Swiss conglomerate. That's right, today gents, I want to go through the entire history of the Swatch Group, a company with roots dating back to 1735. We'll talk about the history behind the company, the brands they own today, and how a once insolvent company in 1980 has now come to dominate the multi-billion-dollar watch industry. I will apologize ahead of time for some of the pronunciations in this video. That's not my area of expertise. Like and subscribe if you want more videos like this. Wristwatch check Seamaster from 2017. There's a video on my channel for that. Let's dive in. Today, the Swatch Group is a $7.5 billion company with 36,000 employees in 50 countries. Here are the brands they own today, which include one of the world's oldest brands in Blancpain. They also own Omega, Longines, Tissot, Hamilton, and ETA, which is one of the world's largest suppliers of watch parts and movements. Although the Swatch company we know today was formed by two failing watch companies combining in the 1980s, I want to step all the way back to the very first date associated with the company in 1735. It's the year 1735, and Johann Jacques Blancpain starts making watches in Valais, Switzerland. His grandson, Frédéric Louis Blancpain, is innovative with new escape mechanisms, and he also led the modernization of their company's electricity production to utilizing water power, which made a name for themselves in a nascent industry. Not too far from Switzerland, in 1775, a Swiss-born man named Abraham Louis Breguet starts making watches in Paris, and his company is funded by his father-in-law, who is a French bourgeoisie. Breguet made incredible pieces for decades and is well known for his work with Louis XVI, and he was commissioned to make a watch with every complication known at the time as a gift to Marie Antoinette, which took 40 years to complete. It was made of platinum, sapphire, gold, and rubies, and by today's value is a cool $30 million, or the most expensive watch in the world. While Blancpain and Breguet were busy making their fine horological pieces of art, in 1848, La Generale Watch Co. was started by Louis Brandt, making key-wound pocket watches with his two sons. Then, just 5 years later, Charles Tissot and his son Charles-Émile Tissot in Leilac, Switzerland, make a splash in the watch world by producing the first mass-produced pocket watch and the first pocket watch with two time zones. The year is now 1856, and a schoolmaster named Dr. Earls Schild and Dr. Gerard set up a factory in Eterna with a division dedicated to supplying movements to the watch industry. This division would get its own name in 1896, known as ETA. Just before we get into the 1900s, we step back a little bit to 1892, when the Hamilton Watch Company is founded in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. We'll get back to Hamilton in a little bit, but first let's go back a little bit further to 1879. Louis Brandt dies, and La Generale Watch Co. is now run by his two sons, Caesar and Louis Paul. They head to Bâle, Switzerland to start making wristwatches marketed as the Omega brand. They renamed their company Omega in 1903, but they die that same year. In the 55 years since founding the company that is then called Omega, they have become one of the largest manufacturers in Switzerland of watches, and they have over 800 employees. The company is then handed over to the grandchildren of Louis Brandt. Not long after this, the First World War breaks out and brings economic challenges to the Swiss watchmaking world and leads to the merger of Omega, Lemania, and Tissot in 1930, creating the SSIH group in Geneva. I'm just gonna try this once. SSIH stands for Société Suisse pour Industrie Horloge. The third company in that group, Lemania, is known for their excellence in watchmaking and watch manufacturing. Lemania was founded in 1884 by Alfred Lugren, who trained at Jaeger-LeCoultre, and those movements became the heart that ran Omega and other brands many years later. Just before that merger though, off in Beirut, London in 1928, the second child of a family known by the Hayeks was born, and we'll get to him a little bit later. As a result of those hard times in the Swiss watchmaking world, just 1 year later, the founding of the ASUAG group is led by the Swiss government and Swiss banks. Their mandate was to combat economic crisis, the high unemployment at the time, and in general to improve and develop the Swiss watch industry. At the time, movement, supplies, and manufacturing was all very inconsistent, and this is something that they were trying to address. From the creation of SSIH in the ASUAG, the Swiss watchmaking world flourishes. Many brands were launched, purchased, and sold at that time, but then World War II breaks out. Switzerland ends up benefiting from the war because they were neutral and they could continue to produce consumer timepieces while the rest of the world's timekeeping and manufacturing expertise went into military devices. Because of this, the Swiss enjoyed a 50+% market share going into the 1970s. Which is when we get into the fun part. So the quartz crisis can be traced back to about 1954 in America, where a Swiss engineer named Max Herzel helps produce the Bulova Accutron, and in 1957, the Hamilton 500 electronic watch was produced. None of these technological advances happened in a vacuum. By the 60s, there had been movements by a Swiss conglomerate developed And then of course you have Seiko investing in that development as well. Now we get to 1969, which is a huge year in the watch world. Not only do the Americans put a man on the moon, so you have Buzz Aldrin wearing a watch made by Omega with a movement produced by Lemania, spawning the moon watch. Hamilton ceases the American production of their watches and move it to Switzerland. Then just before the end of 1969, you get the first quartz wristwatch. It's unveiled on Christmas as the Seiko Astron for a whopping 450,000 yen, or at the time 1,250 US dollars, which in today's dollars is about $8,800. It takes nearly 10 years for these watches to devise the Swiss watch industry, but when it does, it hits like a tsunami. Because the Swiss were so tied up in their identity being tied to watchmaking excellence, the Swiss did not see a necessity to move into electronic movements. Outside of Switzerland, the Japanese and Americans embraced this new technology, and this is where the tides turned for companies that had invested in the microelectronics during the war. Brands like Hamilton or Bulova, which were doing well or struggling pre-crisis, are now starting to take off. You also see the rise of Citizen and Seiko. The 70s becomes a tipping point as the technology is developed, consumers adopt it, the price goes down, and then more pieces are produced. Quartz watches in the early 70s were very expensive, but then the price came down drastically. As Hamilton excels in this time frame, the SSIH group buys them in 1971. Likely as a technology play, they're an interesting company that at the time has an American brand, but with Swiss manufacturing and expertise in electronic movements, starting with that 500 we talked about. Swiss watch brands begin to shutter very quickly, with 63% of them not making it through the 70s and filing for bankruptcy. You have dozens of brands that start up outside of Switzerland, which sends Switzerland's watchmaking world into a slow spiral. ETA starts to feel the heat at this time, much like the turbulence that it felt back in the 1920s. ETA actually has roots in several companies, including Ubang and FHF with its roots back to 1793. In 1978, Dr. Ernst Tomk becomes the CEO of the ETA group, and he leads a small team to develop the second watch, or Swatch, but we're not quite in the 80s yet. Remember back in 1971, we talked about the SSIH and the ASUAG being formed? Well, now with the quartz crisis, they are both feeling the heat again, and they are on the brink of collapse. There's a holding company formed, partially owned by the banks and the government, and the group is named SMH in 1983, which, if we're going to try this again, Society Microelectronics Horologie? So this now includes all of the SSIH, all of the ASUAG, all of the manufacturing under the ETA name, including the FHF and Ubangs. At this time, Mr. Nick Hayek, who is that baby I mentioned back in 1928, is running Hayek Engineering based in Zurich. Nicolas Hayek in the early 1980s is one of the world's most renowned consultants in the watchmaking world, successfully orchestrating turnarounds of the largest European multinational brands. He has over 300 clients in 30 countries. He is brought in to oversee the merger in 1983, just as ETA is completing this brand new movement, which is a low-cost quartz movement with just 51 pieces instead of the standard 91. On March 1st, 1983, the Swatch is unveiled to the world at $39 for a starting price point and starts a global phenomenon. While that's happening, Hayek identifies all the problems that are going on in the new conglomerate and looks across the organization to develop efficiencies of scale in all of the watchmaking expertise, R&D, and design that's going on individually in the brands, but he essentially moves the entire company to a vertical model to leverage all that expertise. In 1985, Hayek takes the company private, becomes the CEO, and in 1986, it's officially renamed the SMH. By this time, the Swatch is a huge hit that restores Switzerland as a dominant force in the watch industry after nearly a decade of getting beat by the Americans and the Japanese. Now we're in the glory years, and we have a few milestones left to hit as we enter the 90s. The SMH Group acquires Blancpain in 1992. In 1994, they enter an agreement with Daimler AG to create a smart car. This eventually goes nowhere. In 1998, it marks the official corporate rebranding from SMH to the Swatch Group as we know it today, and they also introduced Swatch Internet Time, which is a decimal concept that also went nowhere. In 1999, they purchased Breguet, which gives them two of the world's oldest watchmaking companies and a lot of prestige, including that Marie Antoinette timepiece, which was actually stolen in 1983 by a master thief from a museum. By the end of the decade, Swatch opened 60 branded stores in order to sell their timepieces directly, and then in 2003, Nick Hayek Jr. is named the CEO. His father remains chairman of the company and very involved throughout. In the mid-2000s, Swatch comes to dominate the watch industry alongside Seiko and Citizen. Similar to car companies where you have Cadillac at the high end and Chevy at the low end, Swatch positions their brands very intelligently, with Flick Flack and Swatch being down at the entry level up to the mid-range with Tissot, Hamilton. They continue to jockey Omega versus Rolex, and then at the highest end with Blancpain, Breguet, and other prestige brands in their portfolio. The Swatch Group and ETA continually innovate on their movements and manufacturing processes, with the System 51 debuted in Baselworld, which is the world's first mechanical movement with an entirely automated assembly, and then the innovative coaxial escapement, which powers most of Omega's line today. In 2010, at 82 years old, Nick Hayek is ranked as the 232nd world's richest person with a net worth of $3.9 billion. That same year, he dies from sudden cardiac arrest in his bail office, doing what he loves. Nick Hayek Jr. remains the CEO today, and the company is the strongest in its history. Currently, Swatch is seeing a multifaceted attack. From one hand, you have the fashion brands that are popping up from people's basements and other places. There are other micro brands that are popping up, but it's very easy to create a watch brand today compared to what it was in the past, and I talked about that in a previous video. And you also have the Japanese and the Chinese making excellent movements, selling those to the fashion brands at a time when the Swiss-made label is a little bit dicey. You also have a direct line to sell and advertise to consumers through Facebook, Instagram, and other web ads, which Swatch may be using, but they've opened up this world to the movements and the Daniel Wellingtons, which are taking away mind share from traditional Swiss companies, and they just haven't been able to compete in the same way. Now, Swatch could have made more minimalist looking, affordable timepieces, but they left that market open, and a lot of people are now filling that space. So that is it. That is the history of Swatch, and there's a way more that I could go into. You could do videos on each of the brand histories and everything else, but I never saw a video that really brought it all together in one place, just like this. I had moderate knowledge of the Swatch Group itself, but I had no idea of the rich history of all of the brands, and the fact that ETA is actually part of the Swatch Group is very fascinating as well. So if you want to see more videos like this, let me know. I'd love to hear your comments down below on maybe the places that I was wrong. You know, I definitely missed a lot of things, but I could only make this video so long, and I could only make this script. I kept adding to it and everything else, but this has been a labor of love. I absolutely love putting this video together, and I'd love to do more. As I've said before, I love these Wednesday videos. Please share it if you know anybody that would be interested, because that really helps grow the channel and gets the word out there. And until next time, gents, this is the Kavalier.